Almost 5:30. All right, so I think it's now 5:30 on August 8th, 2024. So I'll go ahead and call to order this regular meeting of the Deschutes County Planning Commission. Our first item on the agenda is, one moment, please. Our approval of minutes from July 25th. I'd actually like to ask for a motion on these minutes. I know we're not doing that normally, but would anyone like to make a motion regarding the minutes?
I wasn't here.
Okay, anyone else?
Motion to approve.
Yeah, can you say it in there?
I motion to approve the minutes,
From July 25th.
July 25th.
I second that.
Okay, I just wanted to have a motion because I wasn't here either, but I noticed a mistake on the minutes last minute. And I know it's ideal if I submit those mistakes ahead of time, but since I unfortunately was not able to do that, I'm just going to bring it to everyone's attention, but I think I'll leave it to the people who were here to actually, can we have a vote if there's only 4 of us? If somebody abstains, does that even count? Does anyone know? All 4 of us have to vote for it to be a quorum.
Madam Chair, it's a good question. I'm not sure I know you have a quorum now. You have one who wasn't in attendance. If you would like to wait.
Two not in attendance.
So you may want to just wait for the next meeting. You could carry it over.
Let's do
It's
that.
an observation that none of the planning commissioners that are not here didn't respond to the minutes. So I mean,
Yeah.
there's no rush. So if you want to just ask to carry it forward, we'll do that.
Let's carry it forward. Just for the record, and this is something I can ask you to verify. I listened to the video and it seems the roll call vote at the beginning, it seemed that Commissioner Kelly wanted to go through the matrix and did not vote yes at the outset of the meeting, correct? You may not remember, but okay. Well, in my listening of the video, it seemed like Commissioner Kelly wanted to go ahead and proceed with the matrix, but on the minutes it says that she voted yes at the outset. So I thought we should probably correct that. But I will go ahead and email Tracy and request that separately, and we can carry forward this item to the next meeting. All right, let's proceed to the next one, public comment about items not on the agenda. Are there any members of the public present on Zoom who may like to make a comment about something that's not on our agenda tonight? Okay, so seeing none. Also, are there any commissioners present on Zoom? We don't have our screens on. Okay, great. Just double checking. Thank you. All right, let's move to action items. First one is going to be a staff update, draft statewide wildfire hazard mapping and rules discussion with Kyle Collins, associate planner.
Yeah, good evening, commissioners. Again, for the record, Kyle Collins, associate planner. So this is just going to be a general update. I'll give a little bit of background here. I think most of you are aware of this. We've talked about this for literally the last 2 years now, but just so everyone's on the same page. Back in 2021, Senate Bill 762 was passed. That was a big statewide piece of legislation to deal with wildfire impacts statewide. Had a variety of items, but one of the biggest ones was the creation of this state wildfire hazard map. It's now known as the state wildfire hazard map. It was previously called the risk map. The purpose of the creation of that map is ultimately to guide new regulatory standards for development that happens throughout the entire state of Oregon. Primarily, the new building codes that are forthcoming are what we would describe as fire hardening standards for new residential construction. So actually what your house is built out of, what your roof is made of, those types of things. And the other piece is defensible space standards that are also forthcoming ultimately from the Oregon State Fire Marshal. So we're talking about vegetation management surrounding individual structures on your property. So as you all might be aware, the first iteration of that map came out in 2022. So almost exactly 2 years ago now. There's a lot of public outcry, and based on that public outcry, the Oregon Department of Forestry elected to withdraw that version of the map and go through a much larger series of public engagements, going both to county planning departments, speaking with individual community members, and trying to incorporate some of that feedback in this new iteration of the map, which was just released about a week ago, basically, a little over a week ago. So now I'm just here to provide an update. None of the primary pieces of what is coming along with the map, those rules, have been changed at all. Some of the main pieces that were intended to be updated in this version of the map is there's a more thorough consideration of irrigated agriculture that Oregon State University, who is the actual creator of the map, intended to put into this. There's also intended to be a much more rigorous, just public outreach in general. So Oregon Department of Forestry and Oregon State University have been doing a series of open houses. There's one in Deschutes County about a month ago that occurred, and they've done others throughout the state. And this is all in preparation of a final version of this map that'll actually come out October the 1st. So right now they've released this draft version of the map. They've opened up a public comment period. Anyone can contact the Oregon Department of Forestry. We as county staff have tried to push some information around how to contact them, what sorts of feedback that they might be looking for. And the goal is all that feedback is going to be taken until August the 18th. So you've got just over 10 days, or 10 days exactly, to provide feedback to the Oregon Department of Forestry. And then ultimately they'll take those last pieces of information and compile them into a final version of the map, which again will come out in October. Once the map itself comes out, there's some uncertainty around how the implementation is actually going to roll out. The most recent understanding that we have as staff is that once the map comes out, there'll be a period of time where property owners can go through, they can appeal their hazard classification if they choose to do. That process is yet to be formalized. But ultimately by October 1st, they'll have specific steps that you could reach out to the Oregon Department of Forestry and say, I was mapped as this. I disagree. And they'll have a formal appeals process in place that'll go for 2 months after release of the map. But then sometime in 2025 is when we expect the actual rules to come online. So there'll be a 6-month grace period is what we've been told by the Building Codes Division from the release of the map to the point that rulemaking occurs where they're actually updating the building codes, updating the defensible space codes and putting those in place so that sometime in the first half of 2025 is when we would actually expect this map to have teeth, so to speak, and implement rules on the ground. So as a part of your materials today, we just try to give like an overview of what this new draft of the map looks like for Deschutes County. We kind of gave you some snapshots of primarily surrounding our 4 incorporated communities, but some other areas of the county as well. We've given some summary statistics of how many properties fall specifically within the high hazard designation and what's called the wildland urban interface. I think everyone heard that term. But those 2 pieces of overlapping data are actually what trigger new development regulations. So you have to be within a high hazard area and you have to be within a WUI for any new forthcoming rules to be put in place. So we tried to summarize those as well as we could based on some of this data. Another piece that I'll point out is Oregon State University reached out to planning departments across the entire state to provide some feedback before this map was even released. I was the point person on Deschutes County staff that actually received that data. We weren't allowed to share it in a public format up until release of the version of the map because they wanted us to essentially look over things, identify what they described as anomalies, which was not defined in any particular way. It was basically just look at this data. Does it look right to you? Is there anything we could do better? You'll see a copy of the response that both myself and Kevin Moriarty, the county forester, prepared and sent to Oregon State University. And the goal is ultimately that they're going to take that information. Maybe they will incorporate some of the suggestions that we have or not. But that should all come into play again before release of the with that, if you'd like, I can pull up a version of the actual portal if you want to look at the map, if you haven't seen it yet, and we can post it in the county. Otherwise, I can open it up to any questions you might have.
Would anyone like to see the portal map?
Still work for it.
That's true.
Turn around, unfortunately.
I'm fine.
Okay, seen it. For anyone listening at home, if you go to Oregon Wildfire Risk Explorer, that is the easiest. You can just punch that into Google or search engine of choices. You should be able to find it relatively easily. You'll also be able to find how to contact the Oregon Department of Forestry through that portal itself in commenting on the map up until, again, August the 18th is the deadline.
Other questions?
I have a question, and this may seem naive or silly, but I'll still ask it. Because I understand that it like, so I think some of our fears, community member fears, like, oh, well, insurance agent companies use this information to increase rates for those in higher risk, and I've been told that no. But could you elaborate, like, what is the point of this map? Why did they go through all this effort in the first place?
So the original point had two big pieces. The first, which we've already touched on, is to identify what it was originally called out in the Senate bill as a scientifically justifiable area with the greatest possible risk or hazard associated with wildfire. So that has to do with, there are 4 different factors that Oregon State University was take into account to create this map. Weather, climate, topography, and vegetation. Those are the 4 pieces. They weren't allowed to really use anything else beyond those 4 pieces. And then the other piece is the actual development on the ground. So where structures intermingle with vegetation in some way. And those are the 2 big pieces that they looked at. So the first half of why they created the map is to guide where new regulations are going to come into place. And the other half was to direct resources to areas most at risk associated with things like vegetation treatment projects that are also associated, a completely separate portion of the Senate Bill 21 that's also forthcoming, and to identify what they described as vulnerable communities, which is another kind of guiding framework for where resources will ultimately be directed in the years to come. So there was a big pot of money that came along with Senate Bill 762, which is still being worked out how that's going to be distributed. But ultimately, it'll be associated with retrofitting houses in some way and vegetation treatments. Those are the 2 big.
Okay,
big
that
items.
makes, thank you.
Other questions?
Actually, if I might, a little bit more about, for example, the hardening, the house hardening and stuff that might be required could make a significant difference in the cost of homes. Which, like I say, if it does fall in it, granted, the insurance companies aren't allowed to use the map, but they're certainly going to take a look at the areas around the house, and most of them do that anyway. But the big one's going to be in the housing costs and or permits. If you go in to do a remodel or an addition, you likely have to upgrade the whole house to meet the requirements based on what the fire marshal's office comes up with. So there could be significant impacts to those in that area.
Would it limit like density of development in certain areas?
It has no effect on density of a development or any
Just
types of
material construction?
zoning standards really at all.
Okay.
Zoning or land use standards are for the most part not implicated. The 2 big things really are what's your house built out of, and then what's your vegetation look like around structures. But Commissioner Cyrus, to speak to his point, so these new rules, when they ultimately do come online, they'll apply to brand new development. So if you're building a new house, you'll need to meet these standards again at some point in 2025 is what we anticipate, or major renovation. So if you're replacing the roof on your house, the goal is at that point of time, evaluate the entirety of the structure, and there may be retrofits that would be required at that point.
So I have a question. So I know that somewhere around 72% or 70 something percent of our county is actually federal land. And I know, I realize my question's a little controversial, but I know this is something that's on a lot of people's minds right now. How will these rules affect camping on federal land, legal or not legal?
It has no effect on federal lands at all.
Okay.
It does have effect on state lands. So again, one of the big things that came along with Senate Bill 762 is direction to evaluate Oregon State properties essentially for vegetation treatments where appropriate, particularly if you're talking about areas that might abut communities generally. But in terms of federal properties, there's really no overlap.
Is there a way that that could happen at some point, like where the feds would look at it and go, okay, like we have all this land that's in a high risk area, maybe we should have some way of having rules and enforcing them about what defensible space looks like for people who are camping?
That is a great question and not one that I know the answer.
Dispersed camping, not campground camping.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, I understand that's sort of outside of our county, what we're doing here, but it just kind of makes me curious since so much of what we have is not under our control.
Yeah, and I can say, I mean, I obviously was not personally involved in the creation of any of these rules or this map itself. I do know that the Forest Service in particular has been working in some tandem sense with the Oregon Department of Forestry, even though they're basically a third party that's kind of just trying to pay attention to what's going on and where. But ultimately, Senate Bill 762 and Senate Bill 80, which is kind of the addendum that was passed in 2022, they don't speak to federal lands really or
Yeah.
uses that occur on those lands.
Thanks. Other questions? Okay. All right, well, I guess we'll move on then. Thank you very much.
Good evening.
Let's go to deliberations on the Highway 97 mini storage text amendment. I will just momentarily be turning it over to Nicole Mardell, Senior Planner. And I see we've got our large decision matrix in front of us.
Yeah, good evening, commissioners. For the record, Nicole Mardell, Senior Planner with Deschutes County Community Development. And I can set the table for us as we jump into deliberations this evening. So this is a proposal to allow mini storage facilities in the MUA 10 zone along Highway 97, subject to certain siting criteria. Those being at least on property 10 acres in size, no greater than 30, within 2,500 square feet of an urban growth boundary and adjacent to Highway 97. And also additional properties could be configured in such a way where they could, meet that minimum acreage and that kind of frontage on the UGB requirement. It doesn't have to be just one singular parcel. As a reminder, there is a separate application for Highway 20. So just want to make sure that our discussion is focused on the record for this proposal. There is quite a bit of crossover in the records. So I just wanted to note that quite a bit of the content in here might look similar to your previous deliberations matrix, and that's because those same arguments were presented in the record for this one. But do just want to focus on this record specifically. So the Planning Commission held a hearing on July 11th and kept the record open until July 18th. We've received 2 agency comments, one from Oregon Department of Transportation requesting additional traffic analysis, which the applicant provided during the open record period. And we also received a second comment from the city of Redmond expressing concern about properties that are zoned for the Redmond Urban Reserve area. So the applicant did address that concern as well from City of Redmond and put information into the record and did state orally that they would be adding an additional criterion to exclude RURA zoned or designated properties. So just wanted the Planning Commission to be aware of that when you make your vote. It might be cleanest, whatever vote is made, just to include that piece about the addition of that criteria to exclude those rural properties. Additionally, we received 3 public comments raising concern, in short, about compliance with Goal 14, noting some concern that this is potentially an urban use on rural land, concern with the submitted economic, social, environmental, and energy analysis from the applicant, and the impacts on the landscape management zone and the scenic view associated with Highway 97, and also some concerns about compliance with the county's comprehensive plan goals and policies. So as I mentioned, the applicant provided quite a bit of information in the open record period, including some responses to these public comment letters as well. So some additional information to supplement their application. We are recommending that you focus your deliberations on the applicant's proposal as drafted with the addition of that, exclusion of rural properties. So, instead of adding, for instance, a square footage limitation or kind of digging into changing their proposal, we'd recommend that you review it and ultimately vote on it as drafted by the applicant. So with that, the previous process, as Commissioner Chair Curis watched the video, we went through a couple of these points, so I leave it up to the chair on your discussion on how you'd like to proceed.
Yeah, so just in order to maintain some consistency with the last process, I thought we would just start off the same way as Chair Williams did. So I believe it's sort of an unspoken motion of are we approving this or are we not approving it, or how are people feeling, yay or nay? And then from there, what she did is had since it wasn't decided either way, went through the matrix and had people say yes or no on each matrix item until you got to a no vote, and then you stopped. So we're just going to follow what she said because, like I said, for consistency's sake. So, oh,
Madam Chair.
you weren't here and didn't watch the meeting. So that's how she handled it. So go ahead, Commissioner.
My question is, this very nicely done matrix. Do we need to go through this point by point, or is it in order just to have a motion one way or the other?
That's what I'm saying. I'll just answer that. So what Commissioner or Chair Williams did last time was I would be more comfortable just calling for a motion one way or the other. Yes, that's how she started out. So if you want to make a motion one way or the other,
Absolutely.
please.
I move to approve.
Okay, is there a
the
second?
amendment.
I second that.
Okay, so now I think we should have a discussion on that motion, have a vote on that motion, and then depending on the outcome of the vote, we can either proceed with the matrix or not. So go ahead as the maker of the motion.
Sure. In looking at all of this and the location and the specifics to the application and what they're asking for, and given the location and the fact that granted it is MUA, which MUA is multiple use agriculture, kind of a quasi-urban, quasi-rural, or quasi-agriculture, but the location and proximity to the city and the fact that it is destined to be urban shortly. I'm fine with going ahead and allowing them the ability to do what they're proposing in these specific instances. And so, yeah, I'm in favor of the applicant's amendment.
Is there any other comments in opposition to the amendment? Okay, other comments in favor then? Anyone want to say why they plan to vote yes?
Go. I feel like with what the purpose of the MUA 10 zone is the transition between urban and rural. So I feel like they accomplished that well with the 2,500 square feet, 2,500 feet boundary to the UGB. So I think that does it well of keeping it within that transition area. And what was compelling for me is still the fact of what is a conditional use, like whether it's a church or like a school, something that would require a more significant traffic impact. So the fact that a few things in that with the mini storages, it doesn't require many employees. Yeah, it does allow a caretaker facility, but it's still going to be a lot less trips than what another conditional use could be, like I was saying, a school or a church. So I feel like it's pretty minimal impact for what is being proposed and what I consider a transition zone.
Other comments?
No, I'm in agreement. Find this acceptable. Just, yeah, like everyone's saying, it's close to the proximity to town. It's on a highway. It seems like like you said, it's destined to get into the UGB eventually and probably, turn into something else. I kind of see it as potentially a temporary use for this land while they wait. So to me, it feels acceptable.
Okay, I'll add my comments. I read with interest the oppositional comments and listened with interest to the testimony that we had. And thought some great points were made. However, I also plan to support the amendment because I often have concerns about rural land being developed, as do many of us and many of the people we heard from. However, one of the things that we often say when we have those concerns is we really feel like development should be occurring close to cities and already developed areas. And here we have a proposal where someone would like to do something with their property that is right next to the city and is not a high intensity use, I'm convinced that would not be disruptive to neighbors, especially with the burden of the conditional use permit process and the various other processes that the applicant will have to go through if we do this um, text amendment here. So I just feel strongly that, it's kind of like, if we're not open to something like this, that's literally right at the UGB, then what are we open to? Does this mean we're not open to any kind of development anywhere? So this is my line of thinking as a person who sometimes votes for things that don't allow for a lot of development in rural areas. This is why this one's different for me. Are there other comments before we go on to a vote?
One minor,
Yeah, please.
you pointed out probably, to me, one of the most important things is this is just a text amendment to allow them to make an application. Then the work starts, public process, the conditional use. I mean, we don't need to get into the weeds here. I mean, I'm fine with allowing them to have a shot at it.
That's actually really well put. Yeah. Yeah. This opens the door for future processes where a lot of different things can be put in place that could mitigate impacts and, get ahead of any conflicts with neighbors and things like that. So yeah, good point. Okay, so we'll go ahead and proceed to a vote. Commissioner Cyrus, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Kelly?
Aye.
And also aye. So here we have a unanimous vote for approving the mini storage text amendment as written with the additional criteria that you mentioned. I would like to recommend that staff consider communicating to the Board of County Commissioners that we have kind of a different makeup in our commission this evening. Two of us, Commissioner Cyrus and I, were not here at the last meeting. Both Commissioners Kelly and Stockamp were, but then we also had two people who voted against three, yes, you're right. Yeah, so 3 people who voted against the amendment last meeting are not here. So in case, if I were one of them, I would probably go, now that's weird. They liked this one, but they didn't like the other one. It's not that, it's just we have a different makeup here. And I think it reflects kind of the mixed feelings about the Planning Commission pretty well, and they can consider that for what they want to do with it.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. And I was taking notes on some of the context behind the decision this evening. So we, as part of our, presentation to the board, will provide some kind of the detail on the conversation as well. So yeah,
Excellent.
thank you.
Okay. Well, that was quick. Let's proceed to Planning Commission staff comments. Either of you guys have a preference? Who goes first?
Yeah, I can start. So last meeting, of course, for the Highway 20 application, the Planning Commission made a decision on that. So we have scheduled a hearing before the board that will take place on August 28th. So just coming up in a couple weeks there, and we'll kind of follow the same process with the applicant for this one, hopefully get a hearing scheduled for September for the Highway 97 proposal. On Monday, I met with the Board of County Commissioners for our 4 of 4 scheduled deliberations meeting. They did add a 5th one. So we got through all of the chapters that they wanted to discuss in detail. But in chapter 5 specifically, they wanted some additional context in the chapter narrative about surface water and some kind of additional information from oh gosh, I'm totally blanking on the report by Adam Sussman from 2021. It's a consultant report.
Adam Sussman's with GSI. Is it the
GSI.
groundwater impact? Yeah.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. So
Yeah.
they wanted some additional information from that report added into the comprehensive plan. So I'm working on that right now. And then we're bringing back the entirety of the document with those red lines on August 19th for any kind of last minute tweaks or edits. And then hopefully short after in late August, early September, we'll conduct first reading of the comprehensive plan. So yeah, board has been very busy with that. And again, have just appreciated, through staff, us communicating a lot of the discussions that happened at the PC level that really, I think, helped provide context for some of the decisions that they're making for minor edits to it. So yeah, that's all that I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Madam Chair. For the record, Peter Gutowski, Community Development Director. I have several items to update the Planning Commission on either October 10th or the 24th, to be still kind of in flux based on the board's availability. But one of those 2 dates in October, we'll have a joint Planning Commission and Board of County Commissioner meeting. So that's either October 10th or the 24th. At our next meeting, I anticipate I'll have a date that's locked into place. Wanted to let you know that the Planning Commission emails are forthcoming. So thank you for your patience. I anticipate that in the next 2 to 3 weeks, you'll be receiving an email from me. For anybody who's listening, there are a handful of commissions, advisory commissions, that are going to be receiving county email accounts so they can respond to staff, and if they receive input from the public, it would be expressed through those email addresses, and it's just easier to manage written correspondences that way. So more to come, but thank you for your patience. Your next meeting on the 22nd, there will be a public hearing on housekeeping amendments. So for Commissioner Stockamp, we would have had a work session tonight, but I felt it was important, just more for the general public, to the extent that they're listening, to just get more familiarity with the state's wildfire hazard map. So I allocated, Kyle's leading the housekeeping amendment. He has concert tickets tonight. So I got him in, we got him out. You guys, you were gracious in kind of, having some questions, but releasing him accordingly. So the housekeeping amendments are Scrivener's errors, nothing of substance. So he'll just have a robust, PowerPoint that summarizes the amendments being made to county code. But traditionally there'd be a work session, so you wouldn't totally be caught out, out in left field. But again, there's nothing that rises to the level of a substantive land use issue or interpretation. So you'll be experiencing the housekeeping amendments at a public hearing at your next meeting. 3 more issues. I wanted to let you know that on next Wednesday, the Board of County Commissioners is going to continue their deliberations regarding the text amendment for RVs as rental dwellings. So there's been some coordination that Tanya's been doing, albeit it's imperfect, with rural fire protection districts due to the fact that we have a number of wildfires and their demands are elsewhere. But the Board of County Commissioners expressed some interest in hearing from rural fire protection districts on some of the standards that they might want, the cost that this program may impose on them. Admittedly, the hearing's been closed, so we're being very conservative in what we're communicating back to the board this Wednesday. But if the board expresses interest in wanting that information, we're going to request that they reopen the public hearing, at least for the written record, so to allow this testimony to be submitted. So it's really a check-in to determine, commissioners, do you want to, we have imperfect information in front of you as it pertains to rural fire protection districts. We can't insert it because the record's closed. If you would like to receive what we've had thus far, we need you to open up the record, or you can go straight to deliberations. The last option, the third option, is you may want to wait. You may want to table or potentially withdraw this amendment to wait and experience how other counties are administering this opportunity. The Clackamas County recently adopted amendments into their code for RVs as rental dwellings. It doesn't come into effect until next month, but as the commission experienced, there's a lot to unpack here. It's complicated. And so we've offered that option as well. So at your next meeting, we'll have an update on that text amendment. The other item on Wednesday, and this is complicated, and I will likely give you an imperfect overview of it. Will Groves is our floodplain manager, but the item before the board pertains to the National Flood Insurance Program, the Endangered Species Act, implementing the Endangered Species Act, and what are called these pre-implementation compliance measures. So that's a mouthful. What does it pertain to? So a few years ago, the state of Oregon found themselves in a lawsuit involving how the floodplain program was being administered statewide, the National Flood Insurance Program administered by the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, how it was being administered and the impacts it was having on endangered species, anadromous fish, and believe it or not, the impacts it could have on orca whales. And there was a settlement between FEMA agreed to revisit the program as it pertains to the Endangered Species Act. It's been going on for several years, and they're very close to coming up with these implementation measures. This is incredibly controversial statewide. Many localities, especially in the Willamette Valley, on the coast, along the Columbia, are affected by this program. And the FEMA has not yet released a model code, but they're also talking about case-by-case evaluations as it pertains to floodplain development or development activity in the floodplains. For Deschutes County, it only applies, in air quotes, to Weiches Creek and some pocketed wetlands in and around the Weiches watershed. And believe it or not, east of Bend in the Brothers Milliken Hampton area, which is technically the upper watershed of the Crooked. And so we don't see a lot of development activity out there, but nonetheless, that's been mapped. So this memo is alerting the Board of County Commissioners to this topic. It's a really big deal, even though it doesn't really affect us to the degree that it does in other places in the state. And I'm expressing concerns about the implications of administering this floodplain program in light of House Bill 3197, which was the clear and objective standards for housing, which those responsibilities come into effect next June. It's in all likelihood, it's going to be very difficult to develop, even with FEMA's model code, to have clear and objective standards for floodplain, because typically you have to hire, an engineer. It has to be surveyed. You might need a biologist to evaluate the biological impacts. So I'm alerting the board to this issue and whether or not they want to start thinking about engaging the legislature on this, at least supporting a legislative concept that would remove the responsibility to develop clear and objective standards for housing in floodplains, because it's just complicated. The other piece is this larger magnitude of what it means to have a top-down federal program that is misaligned, or I'll say misaligned, with a state that has a statewide land use system. And for years, county planners in other jurisdictions with their elected officials have expressed the concerns that limiting floodplain development in cities, in counties where that's traditionally where our communities were built, what that means for economic development, what that means to address natural hazards and other responsibilities like housing. So this is a really big deal. And and then I'll pause. I'm realizing I'm unpacking a lot for you. They also FEMA expects affected local governments to adopt these pre-implementation compliance measures by December 1st, which, as you know, that's an amendment of this magnitude could take 6 to 10 months. It could take a year to get community input. And so we have concerns, but to emphasize the application of this program is limited. If you looked on a map, statewide, Southern Oregon, the Umpqua drainage, meaning Douglas County, Lane County, and work your way north up the Willamette Valley and the coastal areas. And then, as I said, as you turn the corner and head east along the gorge, it impacts a number of jurisdictions, even those that are inland, like in the John Day watershed. So this is something that we're monitoring, and I wanted to share with you. Yeah, thank you for giving me the opportunity to unpack all of this. Yes, please.
Can I ask a question quick? With regard to I'm familiar with the White Shoes, the Three Sisters Irrigation District. And what I've noticed is that a lot of the ditches, canals are all labeled as floodplains, even though that entire district is now piped. And so I guess the question is, what's the possibility of correcting those maps before they take effect? Because there's certainly, fact, they never really should have been floodplains anyway, because if the canal breached, it would have gone a different place or a different direction. And the other question is, in light of the Supreme Court case that reversed or took away most of the powers of agencies in the last couple of months, is this even still legitimate issue moving forward?
To your last question, we have not heard otherwise. I think to the extent that those regulatory authorities are getting pared back, I'm not sure if that's being analyzed on a case-by-case basis. But we have not heard otherwise. Concerning you are right about the mapped areas that reflect canals or ditches. Will is more qualified to answer this response. So my response is going to be imperfect. It's complicated. It's not something that the county can just unmap. It requires a process through FEMA that I gather has to be evaluated on a site-by-site basis. It's everything that you kind of squirm about. It's not easy, and the federal government contributes to that difficulty, and it's not something that Deschutes County can do on its own. We don't have the resources. You have to provide the burden of proof. It's more than just saying, hey, these are piped, as I understand it. But Commissioner Cyrus, I think when we have our next meeting, it would be a good question to ask Will. We can give you an update because we'll have a sense of what, if nothing else, we want to bring this matter before the board as soon as possible to let them know these circumstances. So we'll give you another update on the 22nd. But it is very, very complicated, and it has significant implications for cities and counties in like 2/3 of our state. I have one more, and it relates to the comment, Vice Chair Kiris, that you were asking of Kyle. To some degree, there's some overlap there in terms of wildfire vulnerability as it pertains to dispersed camping. I just wanted to let you know, and Nicole can certainly offer her observations as well. But this is a topic that I think is worth sharing with the Planning Commission. It's been reported on several news sites. As we eventually get closer to kicking off the Newberry Country Plan update in Southern Deschutes County, especially, and we've applied for this big multi-million-dollar grant that provides funding to Southern Deschutes County. There was a community meeting last week involving it was at the Lapine Senior Center. Newberry Regional Partnership hosted it. The 3 county commissioners were there. There were staff from Representative Congressman Bentz's office. Federal agencies were there. It was overcrowded. There was so much interest in this topic, and the topic in general was their genuine attempt to talk about wildfire and talk about wildfire preparedness and resources that are available to the community. And it became a very contentious, engaging conversation centered around legitimate concerns that residents down there are experiencing as it pertains, in this case, to the Darlene fire, and the real concerns of how vulnerable residents who live in the rural county, who live in the city, experiencing that wildfire so close to their homes. And so there was a lot of genuine, heartfelt, magnified comments being expressed to, I think, Newberry Regional Partnership, to various agencies. And just if nothing else, I wanted to let you know that occurred. And something that, this is not going to be shocking, but when our staff with the Planning Commission helping to host some of those forthcoming meetings, it's right. It's very easy to when we think about issue identification, the threat of wildfire, the vulnerability of wildfire, the implications that dispersed camping has on the region, the accountability of the homeless are going to be, and others are going to be, prominent topics. So I just wanted to, I don't know, Nicole, if you want to offer your thoughts too, but it's just getting you kind of mentally in the game when we eventually head out there, if not later this fall, as we turn the corner into 2025.
Yeah, I'll zoom out for a moment. So I'm not sure if we've mentioned this at previous meetings, but this group, Newberry Regional Partnership, this is a grassroots community organization. So it started with several community members in the Lapine, Three Rivers, Sun River area who wanted a community strategic plan. So similar to what happened in Sisters a few years ago, they wanted something that went beyond government planning. So it maybe included some general kind of goals that relate to the work that we do in community development, maybe related to like rezoning land or upgrading septic systems, but branching further for things like, trying to get a Montessori school in the Three Rivers area. So it's a very interesting group. We're a part of it. I sit in on their meetings. There's about 18 or 20 of us. So it's us, City of Lapine, and Sun River Homeowners Association as kind of the government bodies, and then St. Charles, the Community Health Center, and quite a few other local businesses. So it's a really great group. And they've hired a consultant to do this strategic vision action plan. So this meeting that Peter described, I was in attendance. There was over 100 people. And really the goal that they were seeking to accomplish was to identify short and long-term solutions to address this issue of fire, especially coming off the Darlene fire. But very quickly, it became a discussion, as Peter mentioned, about some other things. So, we're working with the organizers of that meeting to kind of share some lessons learned from our community engagement events of, kind of how we, structure people in terms of kind of smaller groups so you can have more intimate discussions, providing more materials ahead of time, et cetera, et cetera. But we're continuing to work with this group because it's a really great nexus to the community. A turnout of 100 people, I would say, is pretty striking that this was a topic that needed to be discussed, and there's a lot of interest. So we imagine that there'll be future meetings, especially on this topic, but probably on a variety of others in the future. But as Peter mentioned, we're just preparing for the Newberry Country Plan update and imagine that this will be a major topic. A lot of folks that were impacted by the Darlene fire, this was the closest that a fire had ever come to their property. And so I think it was really real for a lot of people. So I think we can imagine that this will be one of the overarching themes as we kick off that process. But yeah, I think it's again, just a reminder to us of, if possible, we can share the invite with you if you want to attend these meetings, get out and about, throughout the county. I think I did tell Commissioner Williams about it. But if you're interested in the future, we can share the dates of their meetings when they have these kind of public forums.
I'll just ask a related question, also maybe a bit naive, but so if I know the enforcement is complaint driven. So let's just take me as an example. If there's somebody camping near my property and they've been there longer than I think is it 2 weeks or so 14 days. Yeah. So let's say it's day 15 we'll just hypothetically say I'm uncomfortable with this. I may or may not be in real life, but let's just say I'm uncomfortable with the activity there. I call the code enforcement department or the sheriff's department. Does the county then respond and try to assist these people in moving off? Or is this a federal thing? I have to, how do I as a private citizen get that 14-day thing enforced if I'm feeling really uncomfortable about activity? And especially if the activity is dangerous, it's not just feeling uncomfortable, but I'm seeing that there's fires going on and other types of activity that might be dangerous.
Yeah, I can answer from at the meeting, this was a question that was asked a few different times in a few different ways. And what we heard from the BLM and from the Forest Service is that, yes, you can call either of those offices. You can, report folks staying for longer than that amount of time, but there is some difficulty in their regulatory authority. So they're able to, issue citations and tickets, but they're not able to actually physically remove people from a property or evict them from the site. So they spoke at length about some of the difficulty with that and, some potential legislative fixes they would be seeking through the U.S. Attorney General. I'm not familiar with our county process, but the sheriff's department essentially just said the same, even if you don't know if it's public land or private land, just to call the sheriff. The deputies down there will, in that area, specifically in the Lapine area, but other areas of the county, will go and check it out. They've been trying to do more outreach specifically about cooking fires. So this Newberry Regional Partnership Group provided fire extinguishers, some fire blankets, in hopes of just, at least if folks or the sheriff's department are coming into contact with folks who are camping, on lands and, causing a fire risk, to have some tools to be able to put out a fire from camping or otherwise. But Peter, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point of emphasis. If there was, to the question to anybody who might be listening, if one sees something is an imminent threat, or you feel real vulnerability, call 911, call the sheriff. And, they'll sort out the jurisdiction later. To the question of code enforcement at the community development department, we don't have jurisdiction on federal lands. So if there was illegal camping, hip camp or whatnot on private property or non-federal, then that's something we take very seriously. Because camping's not allowed without a land use permit, to the extent it's allowed at all. So
You wouldn't even have to wait your 14 days in that case.
yeah, in that
do it
case,
on day one.
we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cases, and a very small code enforcement staff, but we will get to it and enforce those types of circumstances when we get a formal complaint.
Thank you. That's
Yeah.
really informative answers from both of you guys. And interesting too.
Yes, the homelessness, the camping, I think it was just announced in today's bulletin that the fire that was just north of town on 97 was caused by on private property with a homeless encampment on an unattended fire or campfire or cooking fire. So these issues are getting more and more attention from our neighbors, our constituents, our residents. So there's no doubt that at some point this body will likely experience genuine, viewpoints about, when you think about resiliency and, visions for a region in 10, 20 years, how does it align with these current experiences? So that's all I had, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Any other comments any other questions? Then we'll move to comments.
None.
Okay. Commissioner Cyrus, you got any comments?
I have nothing. Nice short meeting. Thank you.
Commissioner Kelly?
Thank you, everyone.
I'm good.
Same. I just want to say thank you guys very much. It's always a pleasure. So with that, it is,
I do have one comment.
yes, please.
I wanted to thank Nicole for the very nice matrix that you did.
Yeah.
And I did skim through and read it before I made the motion.
Thank you. It's
Yeah.
always there if you need it, but if you don't, no offense taken.
Yeah, totally. Okay, well, it's now 6:25 and I'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting.